What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to it if it's your first time. Today we're going to get into the new Fallout precons. Now, I can't do the normal thematic upgrades that I usually do because the set is kind of self-contained and there's no actual set to go with it, kind of like I did with the Lord of the Rings. However, we do have the ability to build around cards that come in the 99 of those decks. So that's what we're going to start doing, is doing a few deck builds around some of those cards. And we're going to start off with one of my favorite all-time creature types, the zombie. Now, I do know that in Fallout that the ghouls are not actually technically zombies, but they're typed that way for Magic the Gathering. So we're going to start off, though, here with Hancock, Ghoulish Mayor, and we're going to go ahead and build a deck around him in mono black. Hancock Ghoulish Mayor is a 2/1 zombie mutant advisor for 2 and a black, and it has each other creature you control that's a zombie or a mutant gets +X/+X, where X is the number of counters on Hancock Ghoulish Mayor. And he also has Undying, so when it dies, if it had no +1/+1 counters on it, it comes back to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, most Lord cards grant a creature type of whatever type it is, +1/+1, or some variation thereof. This one, however, scales with every counter on it. Now, no, I said counter, not +1/+1 counter. That means that any ability counters, any kind of secondary counters, all sorts of counters that you could stack up on Hancock will make him grant +1/+1 to all of our other zombie or mutant creatures that we have on the battlefield. And that also means that if you can proliferate multiples of like ability counters or anything like that, just with the +1/+1 counters, you can also get those counting towards bulking up our army. And in this case, it's going to be the army of the undead, as we're not really going to focus on a mutant creature type because there's not many of them in the game. And for this build, I love a good zombie deck. So let's start off with some things that we can load up Hancock with to just go ahead and push him as far as we can and make our zombies enormous. First in this is a new creature coming from the Fallout set that I didn't mention in previous videos. That is Butch Deloria Tunnel Snake. For 1 and a black, it's a human rogue with menace that when it attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each other rogue and or snake that you control. We really don't care about that part of it. What we really care about here is the activated ability of 1 and a black, put a menace counter on another target creature, and it becomes a rogue in addition to its other types. Now, again, I said I don't really care about that attack trigger. What I do care about is that activated ability. Giving Hancock a menace counter also gives all the zombies +1/+1, and it is repeatable. That means that you can actually activate this multiple times and put multiple menace counters on Hancock, and for every 1 in a black that you can afford to drop into Butch's ability, it's going to give +1/+1 to all of our zombies, and on top of that, we can proliferate these counters later for further gains. Swerving over into the Ikoria set, let's take a look at Dusk, Fang Mentor. For 2 and a black, human cleric that when it enters the battlefield, put a lifelink counter on target non-human creature you control. Hancock's a zombie, so this helps. For 1 and a black, you can tap and put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control with lifelink. So the Mentor here is a very interesting card in the deck because not only do you get to put that lifelink counter on Hancock, later on, once the summoning sickness is over with, we can also use the activated ability to add +1/+1 counters to Hancock a little bit at a time since he's not human, and it allows us to double dip on the counter granting abilities of the Dusk Fang Mentor. Then we have a legendary human Warlock that caught my attention as we were actually looking for cards for this deck, and that is Fang the Broker. For 2 and a black, it's a 3/3 with 3 tap abilities and an activated ability. The first tap ability is the one we care about the most. It's tap and sack a creature, put 2 +1/+1 counters on a target creature. Tap, remove a counter from a creature to create a treasure token, or tap, sack an artifact to create a 2/1 white-black inkling creature with flying, and you can pay 3 and a black to untap Fang, so then you can tap and do his things again. As I said, we're really only worried about that first ability. Once in a while, you might want to remove a counter from Hancock just to go ahead and create a treasure if you really need it. But then that weakens all of our zombies across the board by 1, so you really don't want to do that very often. And if we're able to actually activate that untap ability and sacrifice, a few odd and end zombie tokens to it, you can stack up several counters onto Hancock and make him very fast in the growth department and make our board enormous. Being able to just do 2 creatures at a time, you're like, okay, there's 4 +1/+1 counters going on Hancock. That's +4/+4 to all my zombies. That is huge. Going back to Ikoria, we also have Void Beckoner for 6 black. It's a nightmare horror, an 8/8 with death touch and cycling of 2 and a black. Discard, draw a card, and when you cycle it, put a death touch counter on target creature you control. Now, this card is pretty much treated in this deck as a 3-mana spell that puts a death touch counter on Hancock and draws you a card. It's nothing more than that. We don't care about it being an 8/8. We don't care about it being a death touch creature. It's just a way to grant a death touch counter for our purposes of boosting up Hancock and all of our little zombies. And the last creature that can add counters to Hancock is one I didn't think of originally until I ran across a copy of it in a box of bulk I was looking at one day here recently, and that is Daring Fiend Bonder. For 3 and a black, human warlock with haste. It attacks each combat if able, and you can pay 1 and a black, exile it from your graveyard, put an indestructible counter on target creature, activate only as a sorcery, and it's a 5/1. Now, not only do we get the ability for buffing our creatures, but it doubles up as a way to make it that much harder to get rid of Hancock, and it is one of the only ways to put an indestructible counter on Hancock in the deck. Then we're going to go ahead and take a look at the instants and sorceries that we can use to pump up our zombie hordes with Hancock's ability through direct and non-direct methods, starting off with Astarion's Thirst. For 3 and a black, it's an instant. Exile target creature, put X +1/+1 counters on a commander creature you control, where X is the power of the creature exiled this way. 4 mana to exile a creature in black is pretty common, but this one is special for our deck because we get to permanently get rid of something massive, and then we get to stack up +1/+1 counters on Hancock equal to the power of the big nasty that we got rid of, which can end up being a massive amount of damage for our entire board. This can also act as an instant speed buff to really mess with combat math by getting rid of something and then boosting your attackers. Another way to do something similar but even do more damage is to get Hancock up already pretty high with other abilities in the deck, and then exile one of our souped up zombie tokens to essentially double up the counters on Hancock. I can't wait to actually do this to someone who thinks they're safe on their blocking and then gets blown out because they let through something that suddenly becomes lethal. Another 4 mana kill spell that we can add here, but this one puts a menace counter on Hancock, is Blood Curdle. For 3 and a black, it's an instant. Destroy target creature, put a menace counter on a creature you control. So this is just one of those few ways we can add menace counters, but it gives us removal at the same time. I like having the modality of the spell. And speaking of modality, let's take a look at Unexpected Fangs. For 1 and a black, it's an instant to put a +1/+1 counter and a lifelink counter on target creature. Now, the best part of this is it actually gives a +2/+2 boost to all of our creatures for 2 mana as long as you're targeting Hancock with it. But not only that, we can do it at instant speed, messing with combat math on a wide swing, just like with the Astarion's Thirst, just on a little smaller scale. Another 1 and a black mana spell that can help us do our goals here is Cannibalized. It's a sorcery that says to choose 2 target creatures controlled by the same player, exile one of those creatures and put 2 +1/+1 counters on the other. This is a very flexible spell in the deck. You can use it to either cheaply exile a major threat to one of your game plans at the cost of buffing up a weaker creature on the opponent's side of the board, or the main idea here is to exile something like a zombie token and then put 2 counters onto Hancock instead, and then we get to go slamming in with all of our zombies being buffed up by 2. Then we'll look at a spell that requires Hancock to be dead, but then he gets to have counters added to him when he comes back, and that is Call of the Death Dweller. For 2 and a black, it's a sorcery. Return up to 2 target creature cards with total mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a death touch counter on either of them, then put a menace counter on either of them. Well, if you pick one creature, it gets both. Black has a propensity to not actually protect the creatures aside from the occasional one-shot spells that grant indestructible, and instead most black mages just let their creatures die and then bring them back. And that's what we're going to do here, bringing Hancock back since he's going to gain both these counters. So since he'll be the only creature getting the counters, he's going to be granting +2/+2 to all of our zombies as soon as we bring him back. And speaking of bringing things back, we got a couple of spells now that will do the same thing for us. Let's start off with Crawl from the Cellar. For a black, it's a sorcery. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target zombie you control. So in this case, we get to get back some of our other stuff, and then we get to put a +1/+1 counter on Hancock by using Crawl from the Cellar, and it can be flashed back to do it again. So it's really nice to put a counter on him as long as he's not the one being brought back with the Crawl. The other spell that can bring stuff back, but it has more modes than just that, is Gix's Command. For 3 black, sorcery, choose 2 modes. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 creature, and it gains lifelink until end of turn. Destroy each creature with power 2 or less. Return up to 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. Each opponent sacks a creature with the highest power among the creatures they control. Now, obviously, the main mode here that we're after is the 2 +1/+1 counters for Hancock, but the rest is nothing to sneeze at either. We're able to get back fallen creatures, we're able to nuke a major threat on the other side of the board, or we can just wipe out all the smaller stuff on the board, of which if you add counters to Hancock, even if he has nothing else on him already, it guarantees that you're never going to nuke your zombies because it'll be at least 3 power across the board going to all your other zombies. And our last instant and sorcery that's available here, and it's another resurrection type spell, is Grave Endeavor. For 5 black. Roll 2d10s and choose one result. Return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the result. And then each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, whereas X is the other result. It's a little swingy, but in Magical Christmas Land, you could get up to 10 counters on Hancock by bringing him back with this. The drain and gain is just gravy on this card. Then we're going to have our artifacts and enchantments to push our theme here in the deck, starting off with Ghost Lantern. It's an artifact equipment which says whenever a creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on the equipped creature. And a lot of our creatures are going to be dying. And it has an adventure side of Bind Spirit for 1 and a black, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So the main thing here is to pump Hancock up over time, but the adventure side can also be used in a pinch to just bring something back from the grave in case we need to. In the same vein, we're also going to include a copy of Tarian's Soul Cleaver. For 1, you get a legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature has a vigilance, and whenever another artifact or creature is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on the equipped creature and it equips for 2. This thing is going to trigger no matter what dies, and it will act like rocket fuel when attached to Hancock during the early stages of the game, and the zombies are much smaller and die that much more easily. Or if you have a sacrifice way to go ahead and just dump counters onto him by sacrificing your zombie tokens or whatever into it. Next, we're going to move over into the AFR sets. For one of the backgrounds, it's Agent of the Shadow Thieves. For 1 and a black, commander creatures you control have whenever this creature attacks a player, if no opponent has more life than that player, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature and it gains Death Touch and Indestructible until end of turn. So in essence, swing Hancock at the opponent with the highest life total, get a counter on Hancock, and he gains Death Touch and Indestructible until end of turn. So it's a nice steady way to get counters and pressure on an opponent at the same time. So that's a great way to go about it. Then we have an enchantment that I did not even know existed until I started brewing this deck, and that is Feast on the Fallen. For 2 and a black, it's an enchantment that says at the beginning of each upkeep, if an opponent lost life last turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Now, this is really strong. It's pretty easy to make an opponent lose life on your turn, but this triggers on each upkeep. So as long as you're able to drain even 1 life each turn or just let your opponents hurt each other, you're going to be able to rapidly stack up counters on Hancock and overrun your opponents with this card. And the last card I really like in this deck as an enchantment is Unspeakable Symbol. For 1 black, it's an enchantment that says pay 3 life, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Now on the surface, this card is terrible. 3 life for a single +1/+1 counter. Yeah, I used to write all over copies of this to proxy cards for my standard decks when I wanted to test them out back when Scourge was released. But that was in a 60 card, 20 life format. When your life total is 40 life to start instead, it's a little more feasible to pour life into this and not kill yourself in the process. And with a decent life total, the good mayor here could spell the doom of your opponents, because if you swing wide, then as your blocks are set up, you pay 5, 8, 10 counters on there. You can even make the smallest threats into your opponent's demise. We're also going to include a small proliferate package into the deck to assist with the counter shenanigans, starting off with the Staff of Completion. Now, the main thing here is the pay 3 life part of it, but it can either pay to tap and destroy a target permanent you own, tap and pay 2 life to add any mana color, pay 3 to proliferate, pay 4 to draw a card, or pay 5 and you can untap the staff and do it again. So this is really good as a mana rock and a proliferation on a stick all in one, but it has other purposes in the deck that can do some work for us. We can even use the destroy target permanent mode if someone decides to pin Hancock down with something like Imprisoned in the Moon or Song of the Dryads, which could really wreck the game plan here if we can't get rid of them. So we're able to blow up the land that he was turned into and keep moving along. I love this card and it will do work for us here in the deck. It's going to include a copy of Drowning Ichor. For 1 and a black. It is a sorcery that says target creature gets -4/-4 until end of turn and proliferate. Now, it's just a reasonable removal spell that can get around indestructibility when necessary, and it can proliferate anything that we need going on. So it's going to get a spot in the deck for that reason. Then we're going to add probably what is one of the more expensive choices in the deck, and that is Sword of Truth and Justice. It's an artifact equipment that costs 3. The equipped creature gets +2/+2, has pro, blue, and white. Then when it deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature you control, then proliferate. So this card is a bit of a 2-for-1. We get to, use this to put counters on our commander, then we can proliferate the counters that are on him, making this just much too strong not to include in the deck. And speaking of strong, we're going to include Yogoth Physician, 2 black, human cleric, pro human. Pay 1 life, sack a creature, put a -1/-1 counter onto 1 target creature and draw a card. But the thing here that we want is the black discard proliferate. So you get card draw, removal, a repeatable sacrifice engine, and a proliferate engine all in one. Again, great tool for the deck, and I'm going to use it here with Hancock. And then the last little bit of this package that we're going to include is a land in Incarn's Bastion. It taps for colorless, or you can pay 4 and tap to proliferate. So we get a proliferate on command. Something I didn't mention earlier with this, but this is very powerful, is that proliferate can become exponential in this deck. And what I mean by that is each kind of counter is able to be proliferated. So as an example, if Hancock has a +1/+1 counter, a Menace counter, and a lifelink counter, one proliferation can actually give all of our zombies +3/+3, because you're going to be add an additional +1/+1, an additional menace, and an additional lifelink counter onto Hancock. So this is very powerful, and I would advise against leaving any of these kind of cards out of your deck. As for the rest of the deck, it's time for our Army of the Damned to get itself in gear and have its helpers come along too, starting with one of my all-time favorite non-zombie zombie cards, Ghoul Caller Giza. For 3 black, she's a 3/4 human wizard that you can pay a black and tap her to sack a creature and turn that creature into a number of 2/2 zombie tokens equal to the power of the sacrificed creature. Since we're pumping up our zombies, Giza just gets that much better. If you've seen my video when I was focusing on Minthara back in 2022, Giza gets better the bigger we can make our zombies, and that just makes it so when you scale up their power, you can blow them up into more power. So in this case, Hancock's gonna be pumping up our zombies. We sack one, and that splits that one zombie into multiple zombies, which are all then gaining Hancock's buff ability. So you're going to actually be increasing your power by however much power that creature was. So example, if it's a 5/5, your 1/5/5 becomes 5/5/5s. So that's really, really good. Now on to the actual zombies in the deck, starting off with some additional Lord's cards for our zombies. Now all these creatures will grant our zombies at least +1/+1, but it also has other utilities attached to them. So we'll just go through these really fast. Cemetery Reaper here is going to give us a repeatable graveyard hate effect and token generation. Death Baron gives all of our zombies Death Touch, making blocking and attacking decisions for our opponents more difficult. Lord of the Accursed can give our zombies Menace on command and makes it so we can likely force damage through. Lord of the Undead gives us a repeatable recovery effect to get our zombies back. Undead Warchief cheapens our zombie spells by 1, and Mikaeus the Unhallowed grants +1/+1 to any non-human in the deck, but also Undying. So as long as any of our non-token zombies and other non-humans in the deck get destroyed or sacrificed, as long as they didn't already have a counter on them, they're going to be coming back for more. Next is my Synergy Zombies package with some zombies that simply just get better as we play zombies, the zombies die, or really only work in a zombie deck. So first up is Champion of the Parish. It grows with every zombie that we get put down the battlefield, whether they're tokens or just cast from our hand. Diregraph Colossus grows with every zombie in the graveyard, and then every cast after it comes down nets us extra zombie tokens. Headless Rider replaces every non-token zombie that dies with another zombie token. Zombie Trailblazer can make select zombies unblockable, which can matter once Hancock makes them huge. Noxious Ghoul gives all non-zombies -1/-1 when it or another zombie enters the battlefield. And last but not least, and likely one of the most overused cards I've suggested in a long time, but it's still amazing and I love it here, Roaming Throne. Now, while technically not a zombie, we name zombie, it becomes a zombie, and every zombie-based trigger while it sticks around gets copied, such as Diregraph Colossus cast triggers, the Headless Rider's death trigger, and the Noxious Ghoul's ETB triggers, and that just scratches the surface of what we can copy with the throne while it's on the battlefield. Next up is the card advantage zombies in the deck, starting with Crypt Breaker. You tap 3 zombies, you draw a card, and then we can even do that while they have Summoning Sickness since it's not a tap activation, and we can create zombies on the fly with this as well. Fellstinger, when it comes in, you exploit a creature, draw 2 cards. Midnight Reaper gets us a card at the cost of a life whenever one of our non-token creatures dies. And Vogard, Necropolis Tyrant, grows when other creatures die, and when it's his turn to bite the dust, we're getting a card for each +1/+1 counter on Vogard. The last package part of the deck is what I call Zombie Burn. Now, all these cards give us a little reach if we can't punch through with combat damage due to blockers or fogs. First up is Shepherd of Rot. Now, it taps to make everyone lose life equal to the zombies on the battlefield, and that includes any that your opponents might have, so pay attention to see if they have any on the battlefield. Vengeful Dead is our drain for whenever a zombie dies. Grey Merchant of Asphodel blasts our opponents for each black mana pip on our permanents and heals us up. Jampom Polluter cycles for 2 black mana, and then for every zombie we control, one of our opponents is going to have a lower life total as a result. Both the Grey Merchant and the Polluter make great zombies to bring back with some of our creatures, and it's just, bring them back to your hand and reuse them over and over again. Our last burn effect here is actually a new card from the Fallout precons, and that is Feral Ghoul. For every creature that dies, it's going to grow, and when it dies, each opponent gets a rad counter equal to its power, in which they'll be damaged as they mill off non-lands as the rad counter trigger goes off on their turn. And don't forget, those counters can also be proliferated to add to their pain. The rest of the deck is what I call miscellaneous zombies. These are zombies that have random utility or are just great to be pumped up by Hancock and our other zombie lords. Starting off with Highborn Ghoul. It has Intimidate, making it a great zombie to be pumped because it makes it a lot harder to block and it can come crashing through. Same kind of deal with Stromgarde Crusader. We can make it into a flyer to make it jump over and punch someone. Ghastly Gloomhunter has flying and lifelink, so getting it larger with our commander can not only fly over and hit someone, but get us back a sizable chunk of life. Murderous Rider is removal on a stick, and then also gives us another good life linker to pump up and gain some of that life back. Relentless Dead has Menace and has the ability to get back some of our other zombies when it dies and can keep recurring itself. Withered Wretch gnaws away at our opponent's graveyards when we need it, just got to pay a colorless mana and start chewing on their cards. Tainted Adversary generates decaying zombie tokens, which can give us a burst of sacrifice triggers when the combat step ends and those tokens die. Carrion Feeder and Phyrexian Ghoul are repeatable sacrifice engines that we have in the deck in case we need to sacrifice en masse to finish off our opponents with something like a Vengeful Dead or a Feral Ghoul, or to add a bunch of counters to Hancock with Tarian's Soul Cleaver. And last but not least in the deck, Ebon Death, Dracolich, and Gravecrawler are reusable sacrifices in the deck. You feed them to Ghoulcaller Giza, you exploit them with Fellstinger, you sacrifice them to Fang to add counters to Hancock. Any way you need to use and abuse them, do it, and they won't be gone for very long. So that's what I have for you guys today in the Hancock Ghoulish Mayor deck. This deck is a lot of fun to come up with. I love zombie decks. Now, you will note I did include Gravecrawler in this deck, but I did not include Phyrexian Altar in this deck because that's an infinite spin combo and you can just, burn somebody to death. And I don't like those cheeser combos like that. I like actually playing the game out and seeing what I can do with it. So I did not include it. But if you feel like you want to do that, feel free to do so. With that said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's deck. Please like, comment, subscribe. All these things help the channel grow and helps me get to my first 1,000 subs, which is my goal right now, right before my 2-year anniversary on YouTube. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.